Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. Normalcy bias. So normalcy bias is something you would not normally apply to a situation like we have right now. And what we have right now, I'm still talking about election stuff, but in a general sense, this is a pretty big sort of thing that's going down right now. It's not, again, about Donald Trump. Well, it is about Donald Trump. It's about the fact that there is something so much of an emergency that it's okay to ignore cheating and irregularities, to change the structure of an election with intent. And let's not even pretend there was not publicly stated intent, okay? We know that the ballot initiatives, the mail-in ballot initiatives, were designed to increase voter turnout. And we know that the expectation is that if you can force people to vote, Democrats can't lose. It's stated, okay? This isn't something that people haven't ever talked about. If we can just make everyone vote, there will never be another Republican in office ever again. Okay, this is not... It's not something that isn't known. You know, and to varying degrees, they do actually go out in public and say this. Okay, it's not even one of those unstated, we know things. And this... I had a lot of conversations with Democrats, party members, candidates for office, sitting senators here in Nevada, and it doesn't, the idea of fraud or miscounts or whatever, that doesn't matter, because all that matters is making sure everyone votes. And then the results can be whatever the results want to be, like if you engineer them, if you fake ballots, whatever. They no concern at all for election security. And it's a little more subtle than, so there's a program that the multinational corporate media has put out there that you're supposed to parrot. And that is that there is not enough voter fraud to matter. So it doesn't matter if you dump out blank ballots or do this. None of that stuff counts, because it's voter fraud. Actual individual voter fraud convictions are the only thing that matters, and that's the only definition of election cheating when it suits them. It's a program that the media has put into your head for this cycle, for this moment, okay? If it changes, all right, and the Democrats get some utility out of the idea of widespread election cheating, then the definition of voter fraud from the media will change, okay? It's a utility-based propaganda reality. So they've narrowed the definition, changed the definition, in an attempt to make it so that you don't know that there's other stuff going on, or that the other stuff doesn't count. It's not real because it doesn't match this definition. And there's always cheating, and there's always needs to deal with cheating, and the more complexity layers you add, the more opportunities for cheating you add, and this is pretty basic stuff. This is absolutely very basic human stuff, and how they convince you to deny that it's possible for students to cheat on tests if they're not supervised. Literally, that's the level we're at. How do they do that? Well, let's look at something called normalcy bias. It's the authoritarian's greatest weapon when they understand what it is. Normalcy bias is a tendency that some people have to adopt a state of mind that it can't happen here when there's a natural disaster approaching. It's not usually a political situation, but you can extend it to a political situation. So if there's a hurricane coming, I'll be fine, it's not going to hit here. And there's some of that gets based on, it's a heavily influenceable state. Normalcy bias is a very easily influenced state of mind. Okay? a way behavior that you adopt, and it's very easy because it's very comforting and it's very desirable. So, normalcy bias would be, again, the tornado's not going to hit my house. Okay, I mean, the odds are actually pretty good that the tornado's not going to hit your house. But you're denying that the threat is there. Now, the way weather has been overhyped and the way events reporting has been overhyped in the past decade or so, we have a tendency to program normalcy bias into the population. It's a very broad tendency, a very purposeful tendency. They program you. This storm is the end of the world, but you're fine. This storm is the end of the world, but you're fine. So many false alarms on any single thing that when something happens that they don't want you to be scared about, like super widespread election cheating, we have software that we can't get into and we can't trust and we know is making errors, but every error is supposed to be a unicorn, but we keep finding unicorns. At some point in time, they're farming unicorns. Stuff like that. The media has programmed you to normalcy bias to the point where they can just say, no, it's really not real, you're okay. Just that simply, and it works. How else do you explain things? Like, the defense against investigation is that the results of the investigation are not out yet in advance. There will be no investigation of voter fraud, according to the Democrats, unless you have absolute proof that widespread, specific incidents, number of incidents has occurred. So you can't investigate and get results unless you have the results before the investigation. Think about the logic of that. Think about how that works. They want no investigation because it can't be there. The argument itself is a normalcy bias argument. But it's programmed. You're supposed to listen to it. You're supposed to adopt this attitude that there can be and should be no investigation unless you have the proof already in hand. No crime investigation. You have to have crime proof first. And that's not even a good analogy because you can have criminal law is much different. What you have now is, you have a lot of people for whom the normalcy bias propaganda is going to work, okay? It's going to work. But you've broken the trust of enough of America that they're not going to believe you, the media, or if you're just puppeting the media, whatever, the multinational corporate media framework, the narrative. They're not going to believe it because we've seen it wrong so many times. It sticks it. Once you make that first act of rebellion, they can lull you back to sleep, but it's easier to break you out the next time. And then it's easier to break you out the next time. And then sometimes the things that break you out are not honest either. They're really messing with people in ways they shouldn't. But why? Why do you think it's impossible here? We spent 8 months watching people design emergency regulations that violate federal election law, but they're emergency, so they're okay. Laws to reduce all points of accountability in the voting process in the name of making sure everyone can vote safely. Everyone has to vote safely. And then, at the end, when it starts to look like it looks like, yeah, we have massive turnout, and exactly what is predicted to happen by the populists happen, which is the elitists start getting spanked because you've now got all the silent voters voting. All of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of ballots, software glitches, stuff starts showing up that just makes it go one way, tip a lot. And the numbers are outside of the range of reasonable reality. But you look at the situations, you look at what's there. If you were an auditor, doing account auditing, if you were a QA checker, if you were doing what's called a quality audit, checking a sample of stuff to see if there's irregularities and extrapolating from there using models. No matter what model you use, if you were to look at the data set that we have right now in non-political terms, like if you could get out the "we hate Trump" part, or the Republicans have made an ideology of voter fraud, or whatever your opinion is, if you just looked at the data itself, there isn't anyone who wouldn't flag that for immediate, absolute, highest scrutiny attention. There's too much irregularity on too many levels in too many ways for it to not be there. So, normalcy bias. Any little incident is just a gust of wind somewhere down the road and doesn't affect you, and there's no real problem. I think there's a real problem. And it's not about it. At this point, they've used Donald Trump up. Like, everything they want out of Donald Trump, they've gotten. So at this point, they've just trained you. Might want to look at what the next step is. All right? Stay sideways. Have a good one. We'll talk more about this. Just think really hard about that normalcy bias concept.